So in that case, I'm going to pray quickly, and then I'm going to read our word, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. So Lord, Heavenly Father, I thank you for all of the incredible blessings that you've given us, every blessing that you've given in the past, every blessing that you are currently sending to us right now, and all the blessings that you're going to bring in the future, Lord. I pray that you would give us rest and peace as we sit and we hear the message today, Lord. I pray that you would allow us to open our hearts to hear what you would like to speak to us, Lord. I pray that you would tune our ears and tune our hearts towards you, Lord. In your heavenly name I pray. Amen. So for those of you who would like to follow along, I'm reading from Psalm 19, and I'm going to be reading verses 1 through 8. NLT, in case you are wondering. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard. Yet their message has gone throughout the earth and their words to all the world. God has made a home in the heavens for the sun. It bursts forth like a radiant bridegroom after his wedding. It rejoices like a great athlete eager to run the race. The sun rises at one end of the heavens and follows its course to the other end. Nothing can hide from its heat. The instructions of the Lord are perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The commandments of the Lord are right, bringing joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are clear, giving insight for living. So I'm going to welcome our speaker up today, the man, the myth, the legend, the man who got in a disagreement with the pavement and won, lost, I don't know, won or lost. I give to you Scott Peters.
It worked great during our rehearsal and test. Donna? Oh, I'm going to get my chair. Speak again? Speak, Scott, speak. I can grab her phone. You gotta love technical difficulties. You practice and test, you do things ahead of time, and everything works great. I was even mocking Kenzie when we were while testing. This is my take my okay.
Sorry, bud. Do you want to stand?
Let's do this old school. Thank you, Danny, for the introduction. Yes, I would say I probably did lose the interaction with the street. I won't go into the details, other than to say today I get to talk to us or talk together about this idea of wilderness and wonder, connecting God through solitude, adventure, and the wild. And as I was thinking things through, trying to come up with the perfect illustration, I didn't have one. So I created one for myself. Not true. I wouldn't recommend this in any way, shape, or form. So this morning, we're going to continue on our series in, over the course of this summer, we've been digging into different ways that people connect with God. That we've talked about, like last week was worship and writing. The week before was through study of God's word. We've talked a little bit about fellowship and talked about hospitality. And I think in each one of those cases, the speakers were picked because those are some of the things that they really resonate with them, that they really, when it talks about communicating with God, those are the places where they feel the closest. And for me, the wilderness, the outside, the outdoors is one of those places where I feel like, for myself personally, I connect best with God. So when originally we were talking about setting these things up and picking the different topics and the different people that would speak, when I got chosen or got volunteered. Colette kind of picked on me and said, this is mine. I thought to myself, perfect. We're going to make this an activation Sunday where 100% is activation. There's no teaching. I'm just going to get up here, say, everyone go outside and meet God, and we'd be done with it. Like, wouldn't that have been a perfect message for some of us? Then I got hurt, and then I got a little bitter, and I'm like, if they get to go outside and have fun and I don't, So what we're going to do today is hopefully a little bit of both. We're going to read some scripture. I'm going to tell you some stories of my life and also kind of walk through some of the connection points that I've made over the last 40 years. I know I'm not 40, I'm 54. But over the last number of years, just sort of connecting with God, going through rhythms and routines and trying to figure out, how does this thing work? How does connecting with God really work for Scott? So as I talk today, as I speak today, as I share stories, as I draw some conclusions, I want us to be careful that this is the way that Scott connects with God. This is not going to be a formula that you can sort of remove my name, put your name in, and then it's going to work perfectly. Some of the insights, some of the things I've learned have been hard fought. Some of them, literally, I need to crash and burn to be able to get them. But my hope as we kind of interact with this today, that you maybe begin to see ways that you could potentially connect with God maybe differently than you do right now. And for other of us in the room, my hope is as I tell some of the stories and make some of the conclusions that I do, that maybe you feel permission, maybe for the very first time, to connect to God in a way that really meets you and doesn't maybe fit the norm. So the title is Wilderness Wonder and Connecting Through Solitude, Adventure, and the Wild. But today I want to tackle those in reverse order. There's a progression of thought and a progression of kind of experience that I want to go to. So the first passage of scripture that I'm reading or we've talked about today comes from Genesis 1:5. And it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and the darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. And the evening passed to morning, and morning came, and to mark the first day. If we had time, I would have read through that whole creation story just to be able to link some of the things that God has done for us. It never ceases to amaze me what the sheer wildness does, at least for my heart. When I walk out on a mountaintop or in a river valley or the myriad of the places that I oftentimes find myself, to me, it's always a humbling experience. It's always a moment for me that just to me reveals God's power, his majesty, and what he's actually capable of doing. Yes, there's a lot of parts of this world that we as humans have tamed, we've cut back, we've imposed our will on. But the amazing thing is that it doesn't take very long for the removal of us from those places to turn wild again. That God has created some things and set some things in motion that no matter how hard we try to change, are kind of unchangeable. And I think that's one of the things that I love about wilderness, and one of the reasons why I connect with God in some of the wild places, is it reminds me of who I am and how important I am, which is kind of not that important sometimes. We live in a world that we control our days. We control our destiny, or at least we think we do. But when you step back into wilderness and you see what God has done and what has been set in motion, when we step back from that, to me, it shows something pretty cool. So I've shared kind of my story a number of times over the years. But I'll just give you kind of a brief recap, so maybe it'll help give some context to some of the things I'm going to talk about. For those of you who don't know me, I grew up in a family of 3 boys. I was the oldest. My dad grew up in a family of 5 siblings, and 4 of those were boys. So we knew what it meant to be adventurous. We knew what it was meant to be boys, for the lack of a better word. And some of the stories I've told, and Ruth can attest, she's hung out with my cousins over the last couple of weeks, and unfortunately keeps coming back with more stories. I may have been a little wild as a kid. I mean, I don't mean I was out there robbing and pillaging and doing illegal things as a kid, but I would have been considered a little overactive, a little hyperactive. I was the kid who was climbing on things, jumping on things, breaking things, running into things. I may have been accused of a time or two being excessively loud. That was my nature. That was who I was. Now, yes, could there have been better control at times? Absolutely. But deep down, for me, when I felt free, was when I was a little bit on the wild side. So for me, being inside felt like a bit of a trap. You see, when you ran and you jumped and you climbed indoors, that was bad. I still, to this day, I don't know how my mom survived. But inside was always this sense of kind of trapped, contained. I couldn't really be me. But when I was outside, suddenly I came alive. It wasn't a bad thing to run. It wasn't a bad thing to jump. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing to climb, although you were not supposed to climb too high. It wasn't even all that bad to shout and yell and scream at the top of your lungs, my poor neighbors. But it was in those moments where I was outside, where I was active, where I was fully being who I was as a young kid. It was in those moments that I was praised. Like, look how strong he is. Look how fast he is. Look how agile. Look at how he's able to climb and all those things, the same things inside. Those are the things I got in trouble for. So for me, outdoors became a place of freedom. It became an place where I was, for lack of a better word, good. And outside was a place that I began to explore and discover and believe that I was good in God's eyes outside too. Now, that's a little messed up, and as I've grown and gotten older, that has been worked through. But it was in the outdoors that I began to see my worth and my value. And in many ways, it's where I think I began to connect with God, and that's why outdoors was good. Sunday school, I was in trouble a lot because I was really loud. Outside, I was really good. And dads, it's probably why the kids need you in children's church, or kids' church as well. They need to be a little louder. The next verse I want to talk about or read for you is found in Numbers 11. And it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Has my arm lost its power?'" And in the Old Testament, whenever we referred to the arm, it was referring to the right arm. Mine's lost some strength. But it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Has my arm lost its power? Now you will see whether or not my word comes true.'" I've always loved this verse because it's always to me been a sign of God's strength. That in tough times, Moses was up against it here. He was frustrated. He didn't know what to do. He was overwhelmed. And he went to God with his complaint or his worry or his frustration, and God came back to him. "Moses, am I too weak to take this on? Am I too weak to guide you through this? Come and see how powerful I am. I will keep my word, and it's true." The wilderness has always been a place, too, where I have been able to see God's power, his majesty, and his moving. It's also a place that I've been able to see God's at times unpredictability. We always like to think of God as safe and predictable and understandable, but a God who's predictable, safe, and understandable isn't really God. We need a God who's bigger than us, who we can't control, who we can't manipulate. We live in a world that talks about us showing our inner strength. We need to dominate. We need to influence. We need to show our inner king and queen to the world and show them what we can do. But in this messed up world, if the strongest thing that's out there is us, we're in trouble. But as I encounter God in the wilderness, I see a different kind of strength. I want to tell you a story about one of those times where I came face to face with God's utter power. For those of you who don't know, I love to fish. And early in my married life, Ruth, oftentimes from mid-September to mid-November, December, was kind of a fishing widow. I hung out a lot with my dad, and we did a lot of salmon fishing on the Chilliwack/Vedder River. And that was a place where I looked forward to each and every week. One, because I love fishing, and two, it was one of those places that I felt like were calm. So in this particular case, it was somewhere late in October. Both the Chinook and the coho salmon were running, and the week out before had been phenomenal. We had limited out early in the day, and we each didn't keep one fish on purpose just to keep the fun going. So we returned the next week. As those of you know, the coast, it was raining that time of year, and it had been raining particularly hard over the course of the week. The river had climbed, but the river was still in good enough shape to fish. So we went into one of our favorite runs. It was called Allison Pool. And the best thing about this particular run was it wasn't totally easy to get to, at least the sweet spot of the run. The access side for the river where the road was had a high bank. And if any of you guys that are girls that are fisher people, it's always tough to fish and land big fish from a high bank. So Dad and I had discovered that if you went low in the tail out, crossed the river and came across the other side, you could get into the sweet spot and fish it from the middle, and typically you were all by yourself. Anyways, this day, the fishing, once again, was absolutely phenomenal. And where you waded, normally when we waded, there's a rocky section, and the rocks kind of were, probably the water was about to your knees, just below it, and it made it pretty easy from a depth perspective to walk there. But it was a little trippy, so if you moved out a little bit, it was a little sandier. Then the water level was kind of just above your knees. Now, Dad and I, because we didn't want people to know how easy it was to cross the river there, always waded way further out in the river, so the water was here. It looked hard. It really wasn't. You got to do what you got to do, right? So anyways, on this particular day, the river was definitely up. It was probably up about a foot. So where the water was usually at your shins or below your knee, it was above your knee. And we had crossed there before lots, so it wasn't a big deal. So anyways, we fished, and as the day went on and we continued to catch fish, we're chatting back and forth, and every once in a while you're having to take a bit of a step back. The reason being is water flows by you, and it kind of erodes underneath your feet if it's going quick. And all of a sudden, notice I'm starting to move back because the gravel is eroding underneath my feet more and more quickly. And I'm like, hey, Dad, is the water coming up? He's like, nah, it's fine. Water's still a good color. If it's coming up fast, it'll change. Half an hour later, I'm like, Dad, it seems like things are getting really loud. The water is louder than normal. And he's like, yeah, I think you're right. But we caught another fish, so we waited a little longer. And then all of a sudden, we're like, you can start to hear in this run, it's super bouldery up top, it's deep, and then it's this beautiful tail out. And when the water started getting high, every once in a while, rocks from up above the rapids would start to break loose, and you could start to hear as these rocks moved through. And there was a point in time where I'm like, Dad, I'm starting to hear those rocks on a regular basis. I think it's time we go. Now, my dad's 5'5" and about 120 pounds soaking wet. So as we waded out, where when we came in it was sort of knee, now it was kind of, and we weren't making it look hard for the people on this side. The water was really that deep. And I'm like, oh no. Because my job as the bigger of the two of us was always to break the water, and he was in the down water side. So we linked arms, we're walking out, the fish are flopping below us. I don't know how many times Dad's feet kicked out. We had him locked in, so we didn't float away. We managed to get our way back to the bank. The river had risen about 2.5 feet in the couple of hours we were there. And as we got across, we still had one fish in our limit left. The river was still in good shape, so we found a spot, continued to fish, and the river continued to rise. As we stood there and watched, and then the river started to get dirty and blow out, you started to hear these huge rocks. And we're not talking just little pebble size. Every once in a while, you could see something tumble. You're talking about 3-foot boulders that are now starting to roll in the river. We came back a week later because, well, there was still fish in the river, and that hole had blown out. And I don't mean just that it was dirty and gross and ugly. That run didn't exist anymore. The way the river came up so high, it was so powerful, it was so flooded, that it completely blew through, moved all of the gravel, all of the rocks, all of the structure that had been there. And Dad had fished this same run when he was in his teens. So this thing had been there for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. As it was, never really changing. In that one storm, it all completely changed. When we came back, the river was on the other side of the bank. Now, I tell you that story because it's a cool story, and it was wild to watch and to see the power of the river, to see the power of God in creation changing things. But what I've learned in that moment, and as I've reflected on that lost fishing hole over the years, has been this, that there's times and places that have always been the same. They've never changed. They're always that way. And it doesn't matter what kind of thing happens, it'll never change. In that moment, God changed things. And as I think about connecting with God, and as I think about the things in my own life over the years going, it's always going to be this way. It's always stuck this way. I just can't. Nothing will ever. The power that I see in God in creation says that's not true. That we can connect with God, or we can see things in our lives that may have been like that where 50, 60, 70, 80 years or longer, nothing changes. And in the right set of circumstances, the right alertness, the right kinds of things come our way, God has the ability to completely change the things that we didn't think were changeable. Now, it's still kind of grumpy that run never came back because it was awesome. But it's a constant reminder that sometimes things change and they actually don't go back to the way they are, which is a blessing. The next thing I want to talk about, so that's sort of talking about God's wildness. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about this morning is this idea of adventure. Can we show that next picture? That is, for me, the sign of adventure. These are my 3 boys. This is probably, I think this is taken out at Horseshoe. Now, I realize that not all of us are adrenaline junkies. Not all of us totally die or live and die on the idea of having adventures. But for me, having a little bit of excitement outside, a little bit of octane, is amazing. I'm going to ask some of you in the room, and I'm going to get myself in trouble. What is one of the number one ways that you know you are about to do something awesome outside? It's a 4-word phrase. Any ideas? Any ideas? Rhonda, can you bring up the phrase? Don't tell your mother. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should lie to our wives or to our moms, but sometimes when it comes to adventure, it's better to tell mom after than before. Or not at all. That was my wife. I'm going to tell you a story, not with my kids, because I probably will get in trouble, although there are a few of those as well. But a story of myself and my younger brothers with a don't tell your mom kind of a thing. I can still remember to this day distinct details of the Invergary gravel pit. It was freedom. It was joy. It was adventure. It was the best place on earth for a 6 to 8 to 10-year-old. And just as I tell the story, let me begin by saying this isn't about harping on moms or harping on being safe. That's not what this is about. But I also remember the moment in time where the allure of the gravel pit kind of disappeared, where the magic went away. But let me first describe this place. As you pulled up to the entrance point to this gravel pit, to this adventure place, was a gigantic, rusty metal grate that said, "No trespassing, do not enter, danger." It was probably 15 feet high. It had gigantic chain, and with this padlock that I'm sure was this big around. I was little. But anyways, and then the grate, you pulled the screen away, you snuck in, and then off you went. Little did I know at the time that there was like 75 entrances, and this was really actually a park. But the place, I think Dad did this on purpose, we went in through, was a place that we felt like we were entering into an adventure zone. So that was the first thing we did. Sneak through the gate, make sure no one was watching as we entered. Then me and my two younger brothers with Dad then made a beeline for the nearest grove of vine maple. Vine maple, why that one? Well, vine maple is the best wood in the whole world to make bows and arrows and slingshots with. So every single time we went, out came the pocket knives, and we would whittle arrows, we'd make bows, we'd make slingshots, all those kinds of things. After practicing our archery skills or our slingshot skills that would have made David and his army jealous, next thing we did was head to the cliff, which was, it was a gravel pit. So it was a cliff that dropped down. It was super sandy, super steep. And what do you do when you see those kinds of things? Come on, this is talking about adventure. What do? You jump, right? So you jump, off you go, you land. Because it's super steep, it's safe. You don't hurt yourself landing. You hit the ground, you tumble, you roll out. That was a great laugh. Who held that in? Pam, let that out. Meanwhile, you're saying, Ben, don't do this. It's funny, but not you. So anyways, and then you get the sand out, climb back up, and you do it all over again. Typically, what we would do then, on the last jump and run, you jump, run, crash, somersault, tumble, and then you head through the bush. It's the coast, it's wild, it's viney, and then you're making a beeline for the creek. And this is sort of the piece de resistance of the adventure. This creek that ran through the middle of this gravel pit, and at a certain point in time, there was this huge dugout, sloughy, wouldn't call it a slough because the water was clear. And over this pit was this tree, and hanging from this tree was this rope that had a big knot at the bottom. The rope was probably as old as the gravel pit, as was the tree, but guess what? Me and my brother would spend hours taking turns, running, jumping, grabbing, swinging. Sometimes it got a little hairy because if you didn't grab right and wrap your legs up or get your feet on the knot, sometimes it was a little close for comfort, but that's okay. All of us are still alive to this day, so my dad was not that much of a risk taker, I guess. So anyways, this was a pattern for years. Me and my brothers, and it wasn't every single weekend. It felt like it as a kid, but looking back, it didn't happen that often. But Dad would take us out. We would have an absolute blast. Mom would have had a day of peace and quiet and tranquility, and I'm sure it was her best Saturday ever. And then one time, we as boys made the mistake of convincing Mom to come along. You can already like, oh no, what were you thinking? So Mom came along and observed all the things that we observed. So let me recap the story from a slightly different perspective. Maybe kind of more like my mom. I'll eliminate some of the fluff. A dad and his 3 sons are trespassing. They're running through the bush, shooting arrows and shooting rocks while playing with knives. They're jumping off small cliffs into sand that is so steep it causes them to fall head over heels before they stop. Then they run through the bush that contains who knows what. It's an old mining pit, so there's all sorts of things. Only then to run through the bush to who knows what in the direction to find a creek. They're never quite sure exactly where it is. Then they proceed to swing on a rope tied to a tree that is filled over a slough. And the best thing about the pit was that there was like shopping carts at the bottom, there was metal stuff, there was car parts. That's what Mom saw too. So why did it change that day? What changed about the adventure? Did Dad get in trouble? He probably did. We didn't get to see it, but the look on Mom's face, that stormy kind of scrunchy faced look, we had a different perspective after Mom saw that and came through. You see, before Mom began to address all of the fear or all of the worry or all of the unsafe things, we as kids saw that as a place of possibility, a place of adventure, about what might be. In my mind, I was David fighting Goliath as I was taking my shots. I was the guy saving the damsel in distress, jumping off the cliff to get. I was running away from the dragon. I was doing all of the things that were adventurous and exciting. What took away the luster was the idea of fear. That what could have happened if this didn't happen, or what this should have, like all the what ifs on the negative. Now, and I don't want to over spiritualize this event or what took place in the gravel pit, but I think sometimes for me, I lose the adventure, I lose my connection with God when I stop looking about the what if, all the glory, all the cool things, all the wonderful things that God could do if I took a risk. And I spend my time focusing on the what ifs. What bad could happen? What might, if it doesn't quite go according to plan? What if God doesn't show up? What if you crash? And sometimes for me, I find that when I get too far from adventure, when I get too far from experiencing some of the things that help me be me, I get focused on all of the worries. And I lose my connection with God. In the adventure, sometimes comes the hope. The next concept I want to talk about this morning, and this will be the final one, is the idea of solitude. Now, I want to be clear what I mean when I say the word solitude. Solitude sometimes, can we pull that one back for a sec, Rhonda? I don't go quite there quite yet. Thanks. Solitude can sometimes be seen as loneliness. Solitude is a sense of remorse or sadness or this idea or concept that we're all alone, that there's no one there, we're by ourselves. When I'm talking about solitude this morning, and I think when Scripture refers to solitude, that's not what it's talking about. It's not what I want us to focus on. Solitude is this idea of maybe being alone or by yourself, but it's being at peace. It's being away from the hustle and bustle, but it's feeling safe. Solitude with God is the exact opposite of loneliness. It's connection, it's togetherness. So when we're talking about solitude, that's what I want to think. It's a place of safety, it's a place of comfort, it's a place of rest and connection. So oftentimes I think when we think about solitude, we think about a place that we need to find. You can bring that slide again now, please. So when I was going through this originally, I had the title or the sort of the heading for this section, Solitude, Finding God in the Quiet Places. And as I've been kind of thinking and praying and pondering over the last 3-4 weeks as I've been kind of working on this message, I changed the title and I left the strikeout on purpose. Solitude is about finding God in the places you've made quiet. I'm not sure how many of you are like me, but my brain is always going. It's rarely quiet. It's only quiet when I make it that way. Let's read through that passage in Kings. Go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. As Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" You see, we live in a noisy world. We live in a hectic world. But sometimes it's required for us to get away from the noise, to get away from the busyness, to get away from all of the distraction and find a place that has solitude. But just because you find a place that is quiet, that is relaxing, it is peaceful, doesn't mean you found solitude yet. Because you've brought your noise, you've brought your chaos with you. You see, I think sometimes we forget that even finding solitude is work. Finding peace is work, and we want that just to naturally come. At least for me, that's the way I want it. I'm going to tell you another story about sort of how I in the times have had to make a place quiet. This was about 2 years ago, and to be honest, I was not in a good place. We had just come through, Ruth had just had back surgery, and that did not go according to plan and didn't go the way we thought it would. Our youngest son had just gone through a major mental break and was just getting out of the hospital, and recovery was still a long ways away. Life at work was in absolute chaos. Like for me, I can do well if one of those 3 legs of that stool are doing good. Home is solid, work is solid, or some of the personal life is solid. I can manage, but all of those were shaky. And it was now coming into the beginning of September, and every September I get that fishing itch, that call to go home. And I had booked a trip. Basically, I was going to meet up with my dad. We were going to fish the Vetter. And that was the thing I was holding on to. About 3 days before I was supposed to leave, Dad called up and said, "Hey, Scott, I don't think it's worth you coming. It's been super, super dry. The river is ridiculously low, and I haven't seen a fish yet get caught. I think if you come, you're going to waste your time." That was what I was hanging on to make it through. So, talked to Ruth, decided there was no point going down to the coast, and I was going to probably just cancel my holidays and go back to work. And at that moment in time, Ruth met me with a similar face that she's met me at other points in my life, where she thinks I'm making a bad decision. And I won't say the exact words that she said to me, but it was something, no. You are not going back to work. You are going somewhere else. I don't care where it is, but it's not going to be here. She's giggling, but it's true. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go do a 2-day solo camping trip. I'm going to go to Horseshoe. I'm going to pull up that next slide. So found a spot here. I was going to go for a couple of days to find some peace, to find some quiet. It was during archery season, so I was going to do a little hunting in the morning, a little fishing in the afternoon, and then we'll figure out what the afternoon and evening went. Again, ridiculously hot. There was nothing moving in the bush. The fishing sucked. Life was miserable. And I sat in my chair, I was probably somewhere right around here, moping, complaining to God, going, why? I've done all of these things. I've faithfully served you, blah, 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 blah. And he was silent, he was quiet, or so it seemed. But I continued to do the things where I went out, I hiked, I exhausted myself, I fished, I waded the rivers, I exhausted myself. And I sat at night and thought. And day one went by where I think I was probably up and out of my chair maybe 1 million times once back to the campsite because I had to do something. By day 2, I started to slow down a little bit. I was getting a little tired, and I called Ruth and said, "Hey, can I take another day? Just another day." And she's like, "Absolutely," because I didn't think she'd want me to come back home. I wouldn't have wanted me home either. So I stayed another night, and the evening was a little bit peaceful. It wasn't quite up and down quite as much. I was able to sit with my thoughts, with me. Went out the next day, hiked even harder, went even further, waded some more rivers, came back even more exhausted. Sat down, was a little quieter. I made a phone call to Ruth. "Hey, what if I stayed another couple of days?" "Yep, absolutely." By the time I got to the 3rd or 4th night, after exhausting my body during the day, my mind began to get free in the evening. And by the time the 4th or 5th night kind of began to come around, God began to download some of the things that I needed to work on. Began to download some of the things that I needed to very specifically work on me, work on in some of those relationships, and even some path of what the future could look like. But it wasn't until I did the physical thing for me that the clarity came. You see, I think sometimes for me in my life, I saw the adventure as the reward of doing the hard work of the brain stuff, the contemplation, the solitude, that if I ate my vegetables, then I could have dessert. And for me personally, and this is not going to be for everybody, but I've kind of beginning to figure out for myself that using adventure as a reward is completely backwards. I'm actually beginning to discover that the solitude and the quiet is the reward of the hard physical work. You see, Paul in his letter to the Corinthian church said this, I will run with purpose in every step. I'm not just shadowboxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should do. Otherwise, I fear that in preaching to others, I might be disqualified. So often in reading that passage, I think about Paul doing this mental, tough, physical work to beat his body, to train, to do all the things, to craft his mind, to be able to give the word, hear from God, and preach well. What if, I'm not taking that literal enough, what if Paul was saying, and at least it's in my case, if I exhaust my body, as Ruth was talking, we were talking with Ruth, get the wiggles out. Once the wiggles are out, my mind now works properly the way it should. And I think for some of us in this room, that might be the case. You've been struggling for years to do the good stuff, and if you do all of these things, then you get to do the reward stuff. Now, this is not an excuse to go out and be irresponsible and just have fun all the time. But I found for myself, if I wait for the adventure until after I've done the hard spiritual work, it doesn't seem to happen. At least not the way it could. When I do the adventure, I explore the wild, God has a way of downloading himself into me that I find the peace, I find the quiet, I find the solitude. You see, for me, when I'm in the bush, when I'm fishing or doing whatever, or on the bike, that rhythmic pushing, the hiking, the stepping, I'm thinking, I'm praying, I'm exploring and talking to God. And then when I sit down and I'm quiet, I begin to get the download. And for me, it's always amazing what I end up seeing when I am quiet, when I am at rest, when I am at peace, when I find solitude. Can we have the last slide, Rhonda? This will be my last story. There we go. So, as you saw in a couple of slides earlier, we have 3 very, very active boys. And we always were struggling to find ways of keeping them busy. And we had just moved to Cranbrook, or we hadn't been in Cranbrook for very long. And we figured, let's get them out of the house. They're cooped up. They're driving us crazy. They're jumping on things, climbing things, and breaking things. So let's go down to the river, a place. It's safe. You can throw rocks. You can throw sand. You can climb. You can jump. You can yell. It's not going to be broken. So anyways, the boys are off doing their thing. Another thing our family does, and this is Ruth included, we collect rocks. There's always a pocket full of rocks that come back from any adventure. And anyways, the two, Josiah and Aiden were off ahead, and Caleb was doing his own thing. And he snuck up behind Ruth. And I think he was probably 4 about the time, hon? Yeah, 4. And he grabs Ruth's hand. I love you, Mom. It's like, yeah, I love you too. No, I love you, Mom. And then kind of squishes his hand. And then Ruth's like, what's that? And this was the rock that Caleb had found. Now, it's not 100% perfect, but you can't get much closer than you can a heart rock. Well, that has started a trend or something that we do as a family. Whenever we're out in the bush or at a river or at a lake and we're throwing rocks, every rock is picked up. Is it a heart rock? Is it a heart rock? You wouldn't believe how many perfect heart rocks I've come up and said, hey, hon, look. She's like, no way. Throwing my heart into the... Sorry. But she has, honest. I'm like, that was really good. No, not close enough. But we have a collection in our house of heart rocks. And this is the thing, and maybe again, over-spiritualizing a little bit too much. But God has hidden himself in his creation. It says, even the rocks will cry out if you don't praise. And this is the thing I love about wilderness and the wild, is that God has hidden those things in our world to find. Those are little reminders, yes, of a love that a son has for his mom, but also the love that our Creator has for us as his kids. So it's amazing when you're in a place to look for it, what you can find. And again, this little image is a reminder that when you're at peace, when you're ready to find, and when you're seeking, God is going to reveal himself in amazing ways. And my hope to you as you've kind of listened to the stories today, that if you heard a little bit of who I am and some of the things, how I'm wired, that maybe you are finding some things as well. How many of you are waiting for adventure as a reward to trying to get the hard stuff done, and you just can't get there? My advice or my charge to you is go have a little fun. Slay some dragons. Take a risk. Do the things that God has created you to do and take the chance. Some of you are probably wondering, what on earth did he do? Not very exciting. I am a cyclist. I ride with clipped pedals, which means essentially duct taped to the pedal. You are supposed to be able to get out by just a quick flick of your ankle. Not so much this time. I don't know how many people have said to me, Scott, are you throwing away your clips because you dislocated your shoulder? I'm like, absolutely not. That's the last thing. Yes, there's a risk, but the benefits and the adventure I get from being clipped in all the other times where they don't go sideways, it's not worth getting rid of it. Go find some adventure today. My encouragement to you this week is to go into the wilderness. Maybe it's not finding heart rocks, but what are the things that you need to hear from God? And go look for them. And I'm pretty sure if you're diligent and faithful, you'll find those things. Let me close off in prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you. I thank you for the wild places of this world. We are so blessed because probably 5 minutes in any direction, we really do get to see your beauty in wilderness at its finest.